Hello, everyone, and welcome to 100% You, a podcast which is all about discovering who you're truly meant to be and becoming the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Bari Barel, and I've been on the self development journey for the past 14 years and spiritual journey for the past 12 years. In this episode, we're going to talk about the one term that I keep hearing all over again, and it is spiritual awakening. I feel it's such an important topic to talk about, especially now when I feel like more people getting more interest in what spiritual awakening is and going through this period. So I hope you're gonna like today's episode, and let's get started. I don't know what about you, but I feel like spiritual awakening became such a common term that I keep hearing everywhere, especially on social media. And I feel it's very important to stop for a second and understand what is spiritual awakening, because it's not something that is like one time happening and that's it. It's not something that you even sometimes understand what you're going through. And I think that also many people think they have spiritual awakening, but it's not really a spiritual awakening. And I just want to clear a little bit all this conversation and to actually give you the tools and understanding on what it is. Because when you're going through the spiritual awakening and you have things like ego death, which maybe you heard about this term or maybe you're not, sometimes you don't really understand what's the process, how it's going to look like, what is this. Maybe you're a spiritual person, but then you have something going on in your life and you don't really understand why it's happening. So I hope in this episode I'll try to help you to figure out what is this, and you could also understand whether you're going through a spiritual awakening or not yet. And I'm pretty sure that the ones who are going to listen to this episode are the people who are starting to feel spiritual awakened or went through this process, or it's just gonna come in the near future, because otherwise it will be harder to relate to this topic. So let's start with simplifying what is actually spiritual awakening. I will take you to my path, my own story, just so you understand a little bit. So I, since I remember myself, I always been more spiritual person, especially I realized it around age of 12, 13, 14, where I started to be more curious about what is out there. Now, there's a difference between being a spiritual person and experienced spiritual awakening. I do believe that the beginning of becoming a spiritual person, like you can be a spiritual person and born into a family who is very spiritually, maybe a religion family, maybe just spiritual individuals, and grow in this environment. But still, even though you're a spiritual person, you might not experience spiritual awakening. If I'll try to define what a spiritual awakening is, I think it's divided to a few categories. First is the understanding there is something much higher than us, than this physical matter. So this is, the most basic thing, which if you're a spiritual person, you probably believe in this and you experience this and it's something part of your life. The second thing I would say is when you understand that what is going on here and everything that comes up of your mouth, your feelings, your emotions, your behaviors, everything that your physical body is doing and people around you, you start to observe it and understand that this is not the full truth. The understanding that there is a separation and we're much more than our body, and you start questioning who is I, who is Bari, who is yourself. You start questioning the bigger questions like, who is this voice talking in my head? What is happening after death? Am I, as individual, do I still keep existing after death? The more deep questions, and you actually start to feel this kind of separation, I would say, and understand that there is something bigger here than just the physical matter. And not only you understand this, but you feel it in your own body. You start to feel like the observer of your own life, and you start seeing patterns. You start seeing things that once were very natural to you, but now you understand that this is just a behavior, this is just the human experience, and you start looking at things from a different perspective. The second category can happen from a crisis, from challenge you face, from something. It can happen from different types of things happening in your life. Many people say that you're experiencing spiritual awakening where you face a lot of pain, but you can also experience spiritual awakening without pain. But I do believe that most of the people experience spiritual awakening through pain. They understand something, and then they start to understand and observe life in a different way. Now, the reason I want to talk about those two categories is because I feel there's a lot of confusion about what is being spiritually and experiencing a spiritual awakening, because you can be a spiritual person, and I know so many spiritual people that they didn't experience yet a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is usually happens during a crisis, a pain, a difficult challenge that you're facing. And being spiritual is something you can come to a family that is very spiritually, and this is how you grew up. This is the environment you grew up in. So it's not necessarily the same. It will be easier probably if you're a spiritual person and you experience a spiritual awakening, but you can experience also spiritual awakening if you're not a spiritual person. And this is probably what starts your path towards spirituality. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So, as I said, my spiritual path started around 12 years ago. I remember I had challenges after challenges from very young age, and from around age 13, 14, I started really questioning, what is God? What is universe? Do I believe in God? Do I believe in something higher than me? I started questioning a lot about the reason I'm here, the reason everything is operated the way it is. And I started asking questions of, is there something higher than what I know? And the reason I started questioning those questions is, first, I came from a family where they did talk to me about God when I was younger, but I faced challenges from age 11 to 13, 14. I had eating disorders, really hard eating disorders. I was bulimic. My parents divorced. I had a lot of things in my school, and I felt that I'm in a constant struggle to just be myself, and constantly facing challenges and difficulties in my life. And it was really, really hard to have it for a few years in a row, especially when I had such an incredible and beautiful childhood, and then like experiencing a few years of really difficulties that most people my age are not experiencing. And it led me to start questioning really deep questions of, why am I here? Why is this happening to me? Is there someone operating all of this? Can I change it? And I started reading books. It was the first book I read was The Secret, which really opened my eyes, and I started really be aware. I was 14 when I read The Secret of Rhonda Byrne, and I really started questioning of, what is the universe, what is energies, all of this kind of stuff. So that led me to my spiritual path. Now, I didn't yet experience spiritual awakening. I was going through my spiritual path, learning about what do I believe, whether God exists, not exist, like energies, all of that. Spirituality and in general, spiritual awakening, this is a lifelong journey. This is not something that happens on one day. This is something you discover. This is something I know for myself. There's so much more that I will learn probably in the future, because eventually your consciousness always can evolve and become bigger and know more and more and more. I will stop here for a second and say, one of the major characters to know if you're going through a spiritual awakening is ego death. Ego death, for whoever never heard about this term, is basically, as you understand what I'm telling, ego death. Your ego is basically dying. We're living in a world where we all have egos. No matter how spiritual you are, you will always have ego on this earth when you have this physical body. Now, the difference is, as I said, spiritual awakening is understanding that you are the observer, and the way you think, the way you behave, the way you have emotions, everything is basically programmed, and you kind of detach from it and start to observe your life from a different angle, from different point of view, and you start looking at things, at people, at situations from a point of view of observer of something much higher, and you detach from your physical body. During spiritual awakening, also it's a period of time. It can take a while. It can take a few phases. But during this time, usually you also experience some kind of different physical stuff that happening to you. Maybe you probably start seeing numbers, angel numbers. Maybe you have different kind of synchronicities happening in your life. Maybe you feel much more intuitive. Sometimes you will also have some kind of kundalini experience. You're going to feel different energies in your body. There's a lot going on through spiritual awakening. But the ego death is a big, huge part of it. You start looking at life from a different perspective. So let's say you have constant fight with a friend, with your spouse, with a family member. You constantly have the same arguments. When you experience ego death, you become the observer of the situation, and you basically understand what is the ego here and what is the real truth. The real truth is our soul is like connecting to the light of what exists in this universe, and you start to look at life and not take things personally, not act from your ego, and be more compassionate to the other person. See things from a bigger perspective and not from your own mind. Many times also ego death happens when you have a collapse or something happens to your identity. Let's say your entire life you were known as someone who is very good at X, and something happened inside your career, maybe your health condition, something happened, and you don't own this identity anymore. And you feel lost, you feel loss of identity, you feel maybe worthless, you feel that you cannot be this person anymore. And in that moment, you start to understand that this whole identity that you build, maybe you're an athlete, you understand that this whole identity, maybe you're an actress, maybe you're a famous person, maybe you're just very smart person, maybe you have the incredible career and everything collapsed in a second, maybe you're very wealthy and you don't have money anymore, or the opposite, you understand at this point that this whole identity that you build can go away in a matter of seconds if something happens. And then you start to ask the real questions. So if this can go away in a matter of seconds, who am I? What am I? Why am I existing? What's happening here? And when you feel this loss of identity, you'll probably feel that you're probably gonna feel a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And during this ego death, at some point, you will start to understand that in order to really be connected to yourself, you need to separate the identity and everything that you build with your soul and who you are. Because eventually your soul, and this is something that I have to say, that when I went through my spiritual awakening, I hated when people say, you will learn by yourself. Like, no, tell me, please, just tell me. So I remember I used to watch a bunch of YouTube videos and people used to say, who am I? Who am I? What am I? And I used to hate when people say it, because for like 1 year I tried to understand what they're talking about, which is also maybe it's the right way to, go through it. But I do believe in giving the tools and make people, taking shortcut if I can help them. So during ego death, you're going to feel some kind of identity crisis. And let's go back to my story. So I was going to a spiritual path very early on when I was 14, experience the white tunnel. You feel like you're separate from your body. You get to a higher place. You feel like you see, people but there's no bodies and everything. And this is like, it will be a whole episode about it, I promise. One day I just need, a lot of energy to record this part. But I had this very strong experience, which I remember after I had it, it took me a few days to just recover and start talking to people. And it took me a few years to actually start talking about this experience, because I was so young and I did not understand what happened to me. But I had this first time of spiritual awakening and understand that there is something much more higher than what we experience, and understand I didn't have the ego death then, but I did start to understand how like this world and universe works and operates. And this is also something important. Spiritual awakening, it's a process. It's a process that can contain different parts. Everyone experiences it differently. You can experience it from a sudden change in your life. When I was 18, I was really deep in questioning what is God to me. Do I believe in universe, in energies, or in God? And for a few months, I was researching it every day for hours. So I believe that was kind of the effect of it, to have this like near death experience. Nothing happened to me, like, thankfully I didn't had any health issues or accident. It just happened on a normal day, which was really crazy, and still I don't really understand how it happened, but I'm really grateful for this experience because it taught me on how this universe and why I'm here. Like, I knew from that moment that I'm here, it's not my time, and it led me to live in much more freeing way, because back then I was scared from death, and after I had this experience, I'm not afraid of it anymore. I feel like I know what's my reason as a soul here on this planet, which is also kind of insane to know it in really young age, which I'm really grateful for. So I had this experience. Everyone will experience it differently. And I hear also a lot of people online speaking that not everyone will go through spiritual awakening, and that the majority of the people will not go through it. So I actually don't agree with this, because I do think that the whole thing that happening now in the world, the whole energies that we have right now, wars, COVID, then this, then crisis, I do believe that most of the people will go through spiritual awakening. It will take time. I don't think it will be a sudden moment that everyone will go through spiritual awakening, but I do think that in the upcoming 20-30 years, majority of the people of the world will experience this. So I do think this is something that most of the people will face at some point, and that's why I also believe that if you're going through this journey, like, it's your responsibility to talk about this and help people that going through this journey as well. So first spiritual awakening moment was, as I said, the spiritual awakening is, again, understand maybe you're a spiritual person, you're looking for questions, whatever, but spiritual awakening is actually being the observer of the situation, of observer of life, and feel it, not just like think about it philosophically, because many people think they're like experience spiritual awakening, but they're just like philosophically asking questions, and they don't really experience it. And I feel like that's also like a lot with social media, that people talk about it but they don't experience it, and only when you experience it, it's actually when you're going through the spiritual awakening process. So first was when I was 18. Then after I had this experience of like near death experience, it kind of took me back, and I felt that I need space from this whole spiritual world. So for around 2, 3, 4 years, I didn't, yeah, 3 years, I didn't touch spirituality at all, almost even 4 years. I felt like overwhelmed from this entire situation, because I felt like I knew suddenly too much for my age, and it felt very overwhelming. And at 22, I faced the first proper, I would say, spiritual awakening. I don't know if that's like the right way to say it, but I faced ego death. And it was when I had relationship with someone that I really thought that it's gonna work, and I had really deep feelings for him. And when it ended, I had more things happening in my life at the time, and everything together really sent me to a spiritual path that at the beginning I did not understand that the path I'm going towards. People can call it twin flames, whatever. I don't know if I believe in those terms, but this breakup with that person sent me to a spiritual path again, asking a lot of questions, feeling very depressed from the situation, and kind of feeling that everything is collapsing again. And that path led me to the ego death. At the time, I used to do real estate investments, and this is also something that I chose from more realistic perspective. Like, I knew it wasn't my purpose, I knew it wasn't my dream, but I did it because I believed it will bring me the money to pursue and go after my dreams and purpose. And it was around a year and a half, almost 2 years of really, really, really challenging time, where I tried to pursue something very much materialistic and tried to do something that not necessarily aligned with my purpose. But I also was really driven from my ego that I'm very young. I was 22, 23. I was like, I want to show that I can earn a lot of money in that age. And I'm 22, 23. I went to real estate investments at 22 years old. Like, look how successful I am. I had all this identity, and then I had all this ego kind of starving to get recognition. But then I was not having the success that I thought I will have during this almost 2 years I did real estate investments. And when I finally decided that, I realized I'm just not aligning with my purpose and what I need to do here, and I decided to let go of the real estate investments identity that I had. I remember I had sudden really strong loss of identity. And this whole 2 years was from around 22 and a half until I was 24 and a half. I felt this crisis of identity, and I was constantly looking for answers of everything regarding spiritual awakening. I started meditating at that time, and I used to consume so much content about spirituality, the universe, the world, God, whatever, about ego death, all this kind of stuff. And trying to understand what's going on in my life, because I felt really broke. I broke, loss of identity, like the relationships, nothing happens, nothing succeeding. And at that time, I just felt obsessed with learning more about spirituality. I used to spend a few hours every day just listening to content, understand what's going on with me, meditating a lot. I started meditating at that time. So it was really dark period where I tried to figure out what's going on in my life. And this is probably when you talk about spiritual awakening, this is how I would say spiritual awakening looks like: a loss of identity, something, a really challenge moment. You feel like you're going through darkness constantly and you don't understand what's happening to you. You start asking so much questions about the universe, energies, God. You start being very intuitive and very synchronized with universe. You start seeing numbers maybe at the time, all of that kind of stuff. And then after you have the ego death and first spiritual awakening, you still can have spiritual awakenings, and I'm probably gonna have more in my life in the future. I can tell you that in the past few months I faced another spiritual awakening that I felt again like the observer of my life, because eventually, even if you have spiritual awakening, it's not like that's it, you're not a human being anymore. Like, you still experience the human experience, and you will feel like sometimes your ego is there. It's not like your ego is going away. You're still this human and have both sides of the materialistic world and the spiritual world. But you now know how to work with this, because you understand the power of each one of them and how the spiritual world actually helps you with the material world, and manifest stuff and understand like much bigger things. But in the few last months, what I had is another really big challenge that I had in my life. And again, I felt like the observer. And thankfully, I already went through the spiritual awakening a few years ago, the major spiritual awakening, the ego death and everything. So it was easier for me to go through this big challenge because I understood already what's going on here. It wasn't easy, but I learned much more in this path right now. And during your lifetime, you can experience many spiritual awakening situations and things, because we're always evolving. And the whole thing here, the whole goal of the spiritual awakening, is eventually to uncover your soul's purpose, to become 100% who you meant to be. And when I say 100% of who you meant to be, think about it as, what is the purpose of your soul? Not the purpose of you as a human being, but what is the purpose of your soul here on this planet? Because you came here for a reason. The chances of being born is 1 to 400 trillion to come to this planet in the body you came here, to the parents and family and whatever. So each one of us has their own purpose, and it will never end. Like, it's something endless. And this is also something we need to understand. So the more you will connect to yourself, the more you will be able to evolve your soul and be more true to yourself, the more challenges you will overcome, the more spiritual awakening situations you will face, the more it will get you closer to 100% you, the pure you, your soul. And if you close your eyes and you will try to think about, who am I? who am I actually without everything, without the physical body, without the environment that I grew up in, without my family, without my friends, without my partner? Like, who am I without the hobbies that I have, without anything? If you're like in a empty space, who am I? And the more you will try to connect to that energy, the more you will fulfill your life purpose. And this is also what I hope you will get from my entire podcast, 100% You. That every day you will become closer to yourself and know yourself better, because that's the only way to actually fulfill your own purpose. And that's the real power and strength. So I know this episode, I don't know, I feel like it was really scattered and I really tried to get you the understanding of the spiritual awakening. I do feel that's like the kind of episode that the right people that need to hear it will hear it. So I really hope it will make sense to you what I was talking about and it will help you on your own journey. If you have any specific questions or topics that you would like me to talk about, please write me in the comments or approach me on social media. I would love to know topics that you would like me to touch more. And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. And I'm going to see you next week. Bye.